Welcome to Transforming Work with Sophie Wade, exploring the future of work. Find out what's going on, disruptions, evolutions, opportunities, challenges, and interventions in our multi-generational distributed organizations. With a new tech and talent focus, discover what you need to know to stay upskilled and relevant and ensure your business keeps its competitive edge. Sophie investigates the promise and reality of the future of work now and as we look ahead. She interviews people who are changing work experiences and practices and shares how we can each transition smoothly and successfully to effective and more productive new ways of working.
Hi, this episode is about Generation Z. Since September, almost all my work across the US and around the world has been focused on Gen Z, our youngest cohort of workers. I've been talking to leaders and managers at corporations, government bodies, and nonprofit entities who are all finding it very hard to attract, hire, engage, and retain them. I've been asked many questions over and again. What do they want? Why are they so entitled? Are they entitled, or what is going on? What do we have to pay attention to, and what don't we? Bottom line, how can we change the dynamics so we can hire the people we need, get them to do their work, preferably at the office, and not doing the bare minimum? And we don't want them to leave. So this episode is the first of two focused on Gen Z, in which I explore the range of their characteristics, personalities, lived and projected work-related experiences to explore and explain what their concerns are as they finish school and start their first jobs, why or if their needs are different to other employees, how they view the world, a critical starting point for using empathy, and then ways to think about what executives and managers can do at your company to attract, onboard, integrate, and involve younger employees so they contribute and stick around. I'm delighted to be talking to Dr. Meghan Grace. Meghan is a generational researcher and organizational development consultant. She designs, implements, and leads research on generations through the Institute of Generational Research and Education with a present focus on Gen Z. Meghan leads the research and data strategies for a learning and development consulting firm, Plaid, LLC. Hi, Meghan. How are you?
Hi, Sophie. It's so good to be here. It's great. I always love spending time with you.
Me too. So, Meghan, Gen Z. We have both been very busy talking to a lot of people about Gen Z.
It's been my life for almost 10 years now, really, is what it feels like. I mean, they're in work and they're changing work. And I guess that's what we're going to talk about today, right?
Yes, but we're going to start off with, how did you get into this? You are a millennial yourself, but how did you start in this space? And what were you doing right before that?
So it is, I always say this was an accidental career. Like I didn't plan to do this, which for being someone that most people would say is very type A, I plan everything. To have an unplanned career feels very atypical. So very distinctly, I remember I was at a staff retreat. So my previous world and kind of current world is working in higher education. I was a campus administrator working in leadership development programs, and our department head at the time was like, we're going to learn about Generation Z. I think they're our next group of students coming in. And I think we should learn about them. And at that time, I was a millennial, and I was like, thank goodness. I'm so excited to stop talking about us. It feels like everything we do is talk about how millennials broke everything. Like we just apparently walked around and broke everything, like from social norms to trends to apparently the entire economy. Like millennials just woke up and we all were like, let's break it. And yet the world is still turning. So I selfishly was like thankful to not have to talk about my own generation anymore. And it was really interesting. It started with early Google searches around like, who is Gen Z? And we're like, they're teenagers. They are doing what teenagers do. They are being on social media, and that's all we knew about them. And so I got into this space really from a staff retreat topic, that from an hour-long conversation that turned into me just being really interested. And my department head at that time is actually my research partner. We've been formally doing research on Gen Z for 8 years now. We launched our first study in 2014 because we felt there's a really big lack in adult and young adult study of Generation Z. Everything to that point was youth focused. It was them in their teen years And honestly, they just come to college. They'd been in college for 1 year by the time that we started to study them. And so we were at the very early age of them being in the higher education setting and thinking about what does this mean for them as students in those very young adult spaces? How do they learn? How do they want to lead? That kind of stuff.
Obviously, having identified as a millennial yourself, but also being blamed for all these different things, what were the key things that you first saw that were surprising to you as being so different from millennial because you knew the characteristics that you'd been learning and teaching?
Yeah, in a very casual sense, like if I can boil down the personality, like what we would call pure personality in generational theory, the pure personality felt very different just in my interaction. So as a millennial, like I take my job seriously, I do care about it. But millennials kind of get this, we're a vibe, like we're in for a good experience. Like we want to have a personal experience about it. And so for me going to college, it felt like, how am I going to have a community? How am I going to have a good vibe or a good experience while I'm here? And that was enough when I was thinking about college. I said I would figure it out when I got there. I was undecided, blah, 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 blah. I was working orientation and I was getting peppered by 18-year-olds, 17-year-olds about what are the career development opportunities? How will I be able to make social change experiences possible? What are my opportunities to be involved in the community? And really these deep, mature questions that felt very different, not necessarily bad, right? Like millennials going to college and saying, how can I have a personalized experience so that I can explore who I am and express who I am? That's not a bad thing. Nor is how can I have career and social change development experiences within college that we are seeing with Gen Z. So like just different peer personalities and what they were looking for at being 18 or being 17 and exploring college. And it just felt so different. I remember being like, was I just not very bright or mature? And it's possible, like it's possible. Or we were just looking at the world differently. And that's also very okay. And those were the things I said, maybe I need to learn more about these young people because I cared about it. I cared about these things, but I didn't care about them to the depth and I didn't know about these things at their age. And I was like, wow, they're going to outpace me if I don't learn faster. So
do you feel that part of that, whether it's maturity or just understanding or they've gathered knowledge about something specific, that was where some of the root was? Or where do you think it comes from?
Their world feels bigger because the access to the world is bigger. And that's a context we talk about in our research is that generations are peer personality and cohorts are shaped by their reaction to the world. And a big piece of that is a perceptual filter. And a big piece of that is how generations react to society and the world around them collectively, which is wild. It's this wild phenomenon. And so like, as we look at a generation, their ability to understand the world, regardless of if the year is 2020 or the year is 1920, what they're reacting to shapes that generation.
I know the younger millennials had almost as much digital access and experience as the older Gen Zs, whereas the older millennials did not. So is it that digital access to information and therefore the perception of the world? So then the younger millennials would also be somewhat similar in that.
Yeah. And I think that is, I'm on like I would say I'm a middle to younger millennial. Like I can still kind of connect with the older Gen Z and that kind of digital frame of, I don't mind taking in content about things, whether it's reading a news article versus watching the video or watching a TikTok or, like the multimedia consumption of information. But it's exactly to that point of you can learn about the world in so many different types of like information whereas older generations, my parents are like, it's on the news or it's in written newspaper. Thank you.
Or Encyclopedia Britannica.
Right. And that's just how they learned to understand what's going on in the world. And so if you are taught from a very young age, being able to say, well, the web is a powerful platform to not only learn about the world, but to share with the world about issues and to educate other people, that is just a learned habit of how to create change. And so those were the things that when I was, in like encouraging young people to go to college, the things they were asking me at orientation and in my job, I said, if I'm going to do these students justice, I have to learn about what they care about. And that has really been the driving background or behind our research is we need to learn about this generation, to make sure that colleges and universities are structured and are supporting students effectively. That has spilled into and really has changed the purpose around the work that we do as this generation ages. We've extended what we know about generational theory to give us more of a foundation that extends into other spaces, because generations don't just exist in educational spaces. They exist in workplaces. They exist in nonprofits. They exist in communities. They exist in chambers of commerce. They exist in churches. They exist in all these different spaces. Like, they don't exist in a silo. They take that lens and that cohort they exist in families. My goodness, so many people ask me how to deal with my child. I'm like, please don't ask me that. I'll do my very best. But they're also going to be parents soon too, which is kind of wild. Yeah.
So going back to this initial understanding of what their concerns were, when they're 17, 18, 19 and going into college, concerns about career and I imagine about the planet and financial security and those type of things, because that for me really becomes a thread that goes through college, unfortunately, with coming out with a lot of student debt, and then going into how they view the world and how they view the workplace and what the concerns are and demands and requests and great concerns feeding into mental health issues as well. It really is a thread in terms of how they're going to create their stability and how they're trying to achieve a grounded and stable and financially secure existence for themselves. That's how I sort of see it. But with that research background, I'm very curious to understand what you learned and how that grew and developed and expanded in different ways and how you framed it.
Yeah. So throughout our studies, we've always been mindful of thinking about understanding this generation from a few different angles. Like, how do they describe themselves? What are their motivations? What are their issues of concerns, the things that are really at top of mind, right? Because these are key elements of engagement, no matter what setting you're working with them in. And throughout our different studies, like we did a study in 2014 that was kind of I would say like our foundational study. We've built on that in 2021. We did a politics-oriented study in 2019 leading up to the presidential election where we talked about issues. We also did a 2017 study that was purely open-ended, and we were like, tell me about the issues that are, most important to you, or the ones that were the things that seemed to really weigh on you. And that was really interesting to do that from an open-ended perspective and code that.
What were the key findings out of that? And what particularly surprised you and or concerned you?
Yeah. So the ones from 2017, a lot of it, and there's, as you said, common thread. They haven't changed. They've evolved a little bit, but the themes, the themes have really stayed the same, whether we're talking to them in 2014, 17, 19, or 2021. They've evolved, though. And I've really started, because if you take it from an academic or even just a more ongoing research perspective, in that 2017 open-ended, the ones that stuck out to me, it really came down to things like stability. But stability is another, like you talk about financial stability, but they might also say, like, how can anyone afford anything when we also consider things like the cost of living or how much it costs for healthcare, or homelessness being a pervasive issue within our entire society, that many Americans live paycheck to paycheck. And we saw that take place like very abundantly in front of our eyes. It's like these young people future forecast what took place in 2020 during the pandemic when we had to.
They were that aware of homelessness before the pandemic?
Yes. They are very, like, financial security is at the top of their list. It's in the top 10.
Because they fear being homeless?
Yes, because when in 2008, while they were not necessarily of a financial earning age yet, they saw what the 2008 recession did to pretty much all adults around them. So adults that they knew either lost jobs, had houses foreclosed upon, missed out on their highest earning potential years because it was either older siblings that were millennials, it was cousins, aunts, uncles, or their parents or grandparents.
Because I know how much it affected the millennials, but I didn't realize how much the Gen Zs were watching. Wow.
Yeah, Gen Z's watching. They're watching and they see this, just like they've seen their older counterparts like millennials not want to take on student loan debt, because they've seen how that has bogged down an entire generation. And so we see it we're seeing these trends where Gen Z is smart in a lot of ways, purely by just paying attention. By paying attention.
And then they have the access to the information to find out more about why it's happening and where it's going and what they need to be concerned about. So they don't have to suffer the same.
Absolutely.
Okay.
So I'm actually looking at something that when I think about our like really the perspective on the issues, like the common threads, it's stability is a big one. Safety and security is another one that has continually emerged and has a link to this idea of stability. Stability is like sometimes personalized, where it's like financial stability, my health insurance, those kinds of having a house around my head. Safety and security sometimes doesn't feel like they have control over that.
And what does safety and security mean? Because it's very interesting you mentioned that word, because when I asked my daughter for my book, when you're looking to a workplace in the future, obviously she's 15, so it's a little bit of ways away, she said, I want it to be safe. And I said, well, what does that mean? And she meant free of sexual harassment, which is not what I was thinking. So safety and security, what are the particular characteristics they're most concerned about?
So some of the issues that we see kind of come up with safety and security, not surprising, especially looking at it from like a United States perspective, is the things like mass violence. Crime, school violence, things where
guns,
they want to be going about their life. And they want to be able to go about their life and feel safe. So similar to your daughter being like, she wants to be able to live her life and not be harassed. Like not asking too much, right? Just wanting to not be harassed. And then, things that we saw, kind of an emergent one that came out, and we're still trying to grapple with it around safety and security in our most recent study was human trafficking. This idea around they are concerned about really like kidnapping and sexual trafficking and predators and things like that. And so these are things that these things come up, and these are the things that we've seen kind of emerge. The other one that comes up is climate and environment. Time and time again, these young people are like, the world is on fire. Why is no one else caring? Like, we don't understand why this is an issue that no one else seems to be paying attention about. And then the other one that continually evolves is inclusion and belonging. So these young people just do not understand why older generations and other people cannot get it through their heads that human beings are human beings. And if we can't love and respect them, like, what the heck are we doing? And they're like, why is this even a political argument? Why is this a political statement? These are human beings. If we are trying to exclude people, we have no business trying to regulate them. Like, so it is just fascinating. In many ways, the issues that they are concerned about, whether they're talking about it from just a general like student lens, a politics lens, a workplace lens, we just see it that they're losing patience with older generations.
So to that point, I see and sense some resentment, some anger, frustration from younger generations, Gen Z, towards older generations, because why aren't you doing something about it? I don't understand. It doesn't make sense. Or if you are unknowingly part of the situation that the world is in, why don't you do something about it? Now, leading to that, this issue of trust and trust gap. 60% of 18 to 25-year-olds believe that other people are not to be trusted. So how do you see this trust gap, lack of credibility, resentment, frustration? How do you see that manifesting in different environments, obviously in the workplace, but as people are leaving college and then thinking about what they want to do next?
Right. So that's an important piece. Like, let's go back to trust. So like, working with people, empathy is your big thing, relationships, like what is at the core of a relationship is trust. That we will never be able to operate as a society together and be empathetic to one another if we can't trust one another. And I think for young people, and I sort of like, I sort of get it, how they can say, y'all had a 60-year head start. What are we doing? You say that you've got the experience, you have the money and the political capital. Why aren't we fixing the problems? What's holding us back? I think they look at it and say, I'm a young person and I see this as a problem. I have everything to lose. I have a whole future ahead of me.
Right.
why are we not fixing these problems? And I think that they struggle to see that. And a big piece of it is we can go back to their pure personality and their ethics around who they view as leaders, who they view as role models, what they value in relationships. It all comes down to a shared value and being who you are, and authenticity, but not authenticity of like live your best life. No, like be who you are and be who you say you are. Right. And not living that lie. And so that's why you see Gen Z is like at the forefront of calling out the nonsense. Right. And really, I don't want to say being the integrity police, but in some cases, being the integrity police, which is not necessarily a bad thing. If you say you're gonna be and do one thing and you do a different thing, then yes, like that is going against integrity. And so I think that there is this erosion of trust with young people because they have seen older generations and leaders in older generations have every opportunity to do the right thing. Let's take the climate situation, have every opportunity to do the right thing to commit and reverse the issues that we have in our world in eroding our climate. And we've done nothing. And then we're going to say, well, that'll be your problem. And they look at it and say, by the time we get it, it will be irreversible. What you are giving us is unfixable. And it's not like you are giving us an unfixable problem and setting us up for failure or worse.
Do you see, therefore, that resentment, frustration growing as a result? Millennials do have power and standing and are rising leaders and sort of taking over from the boomers now as the greater proportion of leaders in the workplace. Gen Zs don't have that. They do have rising voices. The amount of really interesting discussion that is going on within TikTok is fascinating to me because I can get it reported out, particularly from my daughter.
Yeah, I mean, it's one of those things that we're kind of seeing it play out, that as a generation grows up, it gains more agency, right? This is the natural progression of human population, and that is the most almost cold and sterile way that I can say it. As a generation ages, they have more presence in places where they have power. Not to boil it down to politics, but we see this in the United States. We just had our midterm election where we have Gen Z of legal age to run for office. See them turn out in droves for people that are like them, that align with them.
And we had our first Gen Z, right?
I know,
in New York.
And we have one in Florida. Not we, but there is one down in Florida. Right. And like these are things that are really important, and they are seeing that they can have agency.
Right.
This is the natural progression. However, there are systems in our world that are designed to keep that natural progression in order. In some cases, and I don't like that. So the one thing that I do think is a little bit different is that with our understanding of generations is that we're seeing that there are some areas where generational harmony can actually create positive good. One area is that Millennials and Gen Z actually feel like we're close cousins, almost neighbors. Like we hang out real well. We had they like to make fun of us. We're like, dear, we could do what others did to you, but we shall not. Like we don't do that. We're like,
we shall bring you along with us.
Like we're like, okay, we get it. We're here to we want, and that's how I've always used my platform. As I'm not about to be out here making fun of you, making you feel bad, because we've been there. It didn't help us. But what I can do is make sure that everyone understands you so that you can be engaged.
Yep, sure.
Like, I'm not trying to hold you down. I want to build you up because I think you're great. So don't make fun of us with our side parts and our skinny jeans, because we will eventually be, we will be your hiring managers, and I want to help you thrive. That's the thing. To bring it into the workplace, I want to help you thrive. So let's be collaborative. But we're seeing that we see a little bit more eye to eye on some of their social things. We see eye to eye on some things around our systems and our world. And then I'm like, these are areas where while one generation might not have as much political or financial agency and capital, another has one that's growing. Like millennials have that growing capital. And if we band together, that's where we can see change happen.
Do you see that in terms of millennials taking the leadership baton from boomers? Because apart from the fact that Gen X is a very small generation, millennials really get the future of work now. And yes, if the two younger generations band together who have the greatest understanding of the work environment that we're in now, that's a very powerful way to actually smooth the transition. We need to deal with the intergenerational challenges, but help everybody come along and be working in very different ways. I want to go back for a second to deal with the pandemic. And obviously, for everybody, but particularly Gen Zs, that it did exacerbate a lot of trends that were already there and exacerbated the anxiety, depression. Obviously, there's more instability financially and income-wise. And we also have these terrible situations of disruption to people's school and college, the continuum of their educational experience. And I do see that it was very, very different depending on the country, the region, the school. My son actually had his first year at college, which was in Italy. But people who were in the dorm in the university, they were completely locked in. He happened to be off campus, so he was living with 2 other people. So his experience wasn't nearly as bad. Like some colleges in the US, you were completely locked in, and the range is huge. Some teachers dealt with it quite well, and other people weren't able to adapt easily. With this incredible disparity of experience, but enormous disruption, what were some of the core things that you saw happen, and then how do you see these things evolving? And what can we do about it?
It was a really interesting time to be studying young people, is the best way to put it, because studying a generation while the generation is forming is always like a moving target because, like I said, you're studying generation in response to things that are going on in society. And so like every now and then you'll be like, oh, there's a new trend. Let's see how they're responding to that. Never in a million years was I like, maybe we'll get to study them in a worldwide, like in a whole pandemic situation ongoing for 2 years from my home. It was the strangest thing. Like I will say that, but we have to give credit to Generation Z. In many ways, they dealt with something very, very tough with a lot of maturity and grace. Like, I will be the first to say it. So many of them lost important milestones. Some people be like, graduation's not that big of a deal. Tell that to you at 17. Prom wasn't that big of a deal. Tell that to me, a former prom queen. Like, no, absolutely not. Like, these are things that have memories. Like these, regardless of your generation, these are things that mark your childhood and your moments that you remember, whether you loved it or not. They're part of your childhood. And parts of that got taken away from them, and they did it with grace, because this is also a thing about Gen Z, is that they're heavily responsible to the people they love. And so during that time, I tried to look at the bright spots of what Gen Z was doing to help others. Right. And I was able to spend some time with some high school students becoming college students and talk to them like, what's going on in there? To me, it's more important that I don't potentially, and this is a time when we did not know about that much about the virus. And they were like, I'd rather spend time with my family in a safe setting than have my family members get sick. Like I'd rather miss a graduation than cut my time short with a grandparent. Like they were really taking their decisions and saying, spring break, no thanks, would rather spend time with grandma and elongate grandma's life. And really weighing their decisions. And the same to be said about the students that went to college. They're like, I'd rather have some element of college than not have this opportunity to learn and grow. It's atypical. Right. And I recognize that. But I would rather have an opportunity to learn and grow in a setting that is modified and safe than not to have it. And to recognize that privilege. It really bothers me when people are like, well, it's just 1 year of their life. Well, when you're 16 and you miss 1 year of your life, that is 1/16 of your life. It's harder to say to someone who's 30, 40, 50, and you've had more years. Like your institutional memory of being a human is a lot longer. Right. Not that anyone's 1 year counts any less, but your memory is very different at that age. A year feels a lot longer. The value of that year feels a lot longer. And what that holds. Your world feels smaller when you're at that age, right? And so when it gets turned upside down, everything feels more magnified in some cases. And so that was something that I think it is more than just 1 year. First of all, it was 2 for many people. And it was years in which they were learning a lot of really important skills, especially the ones that were in high school and in college. The time in which they're learning their, this is the phase in our life when we're starting to understand not only the value set and perspectives that we learned from our family and our immediate support circles, but developing our own individual perspectives and values. So we start to shed and kind kind of filter what is something I learned from my parents and family members versus what's something that's uniquely to me. And we start to develop our own worldview. And so we do a lot of that through education and, you know, first jobs and interactions in those settings. And so when those social settings are gone, that peer interaction is really shifted. And you know, that peer interaction plays a huge role in the ways in which we navigate work and work settings. And so I think we're going to have a lot of healing time. Like, it's going to take us a lot longer than 2 years to heal from the 2 years we all went through. Like, I know I'm an adult in my career, has been established in my career before the pandemic, and I am still recovering from getting back into traveling for work and going to a conference for 3 days. I used to do that back-to-back conferences, not a problem. Now I'm like, I got to recover for 3 days from a 3-day conference. It just, it is a different practice of that world. Right. And to do it as a young person when you are going through such a stressful time, to learn and unlearn and relearn socialization like that is tough.
Yeah. So how do you see how Gen Zs were going into the workplace, how managers and executives were responding to them? They were already starting to complain, lament, whatever you want to call it, but it's really picked up. So as more of the Gen Zs are coming into the workplace, and this is a very big generation, and soon it's going to be the biggest around the world anyway, the way I see it, there are a lot of tensions because Gen Zs are manifesting or reflecting the future of work that now is, which was accelerated by the pandemic. And therefore, a lot of the pushback against them specifically is the pushback against updating and transforming the way that they're working in order to be prepared and adapt for the future of work. So I'm interested how you see it, how you interpret it, and some of the other perspectives and points of views that you see, and how Gen Zs are dealing with that.
Yeah, so I'm going to go back to my point. I mean, if we're doing the hard math, the oldest of Gen Z are turning 28 next year. The very most, the oldest have been in a workforce in a full-time capacity for 10 years.
Right.
That's not the full reality, though. So that's one piece of it. Very few of them, from a totality of their generation, are fully in the workforce. Important context there. Before the pandemic, so rewind, before the pandemic, the things we were hearing that they were saying when we were asking them, what are you looking for in your future careers and in your jobs? They were saying things like flexible work structures, remote opportunities, financial stability, and not financial stability is different than like getting paid a lot of money. Let's be completely financial stability, meaningful work, opportunity to create positive change, developmental experiences, and a focus on health and well-being. So that was pre-pandemic.
Yeah.
And if we're rewinding 3 years, even fewer of them were in full-time jobs. So where they've learned where they want those priorities, which I would argue, and you would probably be able to validate for me, those are still things that are a priority for many employees, what people are looking for in work, especially Gen Z. It's not like Gen Z is out here being the tastemakers of what's cool in work. Like, they're just still figuring it out. But these are things that they have said that they've wanted. And they have either learned this from a few things. They've interned, they have worked already in a part-time or full-time capacity, or they've seen this role modeled.
Yeah.
So they've either seen it as a positive thing from someone around them, or they've seen the opposite. So they've witnessed people that have been overworked and have had unflexible jobs. They've seen people be underpaid and they don't have financial stability. They've seen people do work with no meaning and get underpaid. They've seen people win toxic and be miserable. And they've seen areas with not developmental opportunities. So there's the ways in which we learn how we want work and work structure. So that all being said, Gen Z will get blamed because it's the easiest way to scapegoat is a new generation because they are the newest in town. So it's the easiest to say, we don't know what's going on. It can't certainly be our policies and practices that we've held for the last few decades. Let's think about the thing we don't understand the most, and it's got to be the new ones. That's got to be it. But in reality, there's no way that these young people who are in some cases not even the majority of our workforce yet, our workplace settings yet, creating such a trend and telling all their friends, including the older generations, that this is a necessity. I don't buy it. They're saying it, and they've been saying it the loudest as a cohort. But we wouldn't be having people of all generations resigning, leaving jobs, and having such a kerfuffle about remote work if it was just Generation Z. Like, the math doesn't math in that degree.
Yes, and so many of their parents are telling them to speak up and advocate for what makes sense in their mental health. And yet those same parents in the workplace aren't quite as understanding when it's actually their employees saying those same things. So I do see lots of concern from Gen Zs for themselves and their peers about mental health. And there is much more understanding about mental health issues, support for that. There is some good destigmatizing of mental health issues going on. I have also seen and read about as well situations where that has been sidelined now, but these remain hugely core issues for obvious reasons for Gen Zs. What are some of the core values and characteristics of a workplace where Gen Z wants to go and work and will be interested to go there, be engaged and stay, and why?
So I think some of the very high level characteristics of the workplace that we're going to see be attractive to Gen Z, it comes down to meaningful work. And that's not always work that's going to go change the world, but work that has it has value, right? And that's not to say that there's some jobs that are more or less valuable, right? Like, working at Target still has value. It brings people joy. People love Target, but that takes leadership for people to understand why being an employee at Target is an important job in that community.
Sure.
You can't look at retail as a job that doesn't have value. I think many people saw that throughout the pandemic, right? Our retail workers were important members of our community. We don't think day to day how important those people are. And we all saw that. Yeah. I think meaningful work, that's a big thing. One of the other ones, I think transparent leadership. And empathetic leadership. I know you'll be happy to hear that one. But transparent leadership, it's not that Gen Z feels like they have to be a part of every decision. They just want to be looped in. They just want to know what's going on. And if they have an opportunity to weigh in with some feedback, fantastic. I don't think they necessarily want to be tasked with every task or that they need to be in charge of everything. They just want to be looped in. They want to know what's going on, because authenticity, again, is important to them, but it's not authenticity of live your best life. It's be who you say you're going to be. And that's an important thing. Leaders, that is their direct supervisor, all the way up to CEOs. That's the thing for them.
What about side hustles? Be able to have side hustles?
I think they will. I think it comes also from this generation is multifaceted. So what I love about this generation is that they are not going to be confined by the idea of being one thing. So they might be a financial analyst that's also a photographer that also does painting. And they might sell their paintings on Etsy, but they do photography on the weekends because they feel like it, because they're really good financial analysts, because they have data science skills, and that's how they pay their bills, but they fill their cup of creativity in photography and painting, and that's okay. Or they might do Upwork financial analyst stuff on the weekends because they have some free time and they're just sitting on the couch doing Netflix. So that's something that they will have, this entrepreneurial spirit, because that's how they've seen business be role modeled, and that you can monetize a passion. And I'm sorry, if you have the time and the energy and you want to monetize a passion, who cares? Who cares? So I think those are some of the things that will be attractive. Problem solving, trust, autonomy. Those are things they're really going to care about, but I don't think those are generationally specific. I think those are just things people want that make people happy in their jobs.
What about a focus on skills and their career development?
Yes, I think that workplaces need to be prepared for the fact that the world of the lifer is gone. The reality of a lifer is gone. And so being prepared that a workplace might be a layover for a person for a while. So can it be a productive layover? I do a lot of hosting of interns or early career professionals, and I recognize that I'm not their final resting place. Like they're going to do some skill development with me. And so that conversation around like, what do you want to learn for your next career step is at the very beginning of our conversation. Absolutely. Exclusively, I work with Gen Z, not on purpose, but that's just the phase of humans that are in that space right now. Yes. But that's important. Like we talk about, like, oh, you want to learn how to do copywriting. Fantastic. I don't know anything about copywriting, but let's find you some resources. And developing that skill is so important. So I think skill development is so critically important because it shows that you're invested not only for an employee to be good at their job now, but that you care enough about them for their future, and that they are not just a cog. They're not just a cog in the machine, because in my opinion, the best testament and the best ambassador you can have for your company is a former employee that speaks well of you.
Couldn't agree more.
Right. Like, so invest in them.
Megan, we could speak about so many different fascinating aspects of this, and it's going to continue to evolve. There are two things. One, haven't I asked you that I should have done? And second, very specifically for a manager or leader who is not sure how to best engage/retain the Gen Zs in their team, what advice do you have? First of all, what have I not asked you about?
About Gen Z.
Or working with Gen Z.
I can answer both of your questions. While Gen Z is like the hot topic, and we're all being very serious about Gen Z, they don't take themselves too seriously.
Okay.
And they are willing to share if we just ask. Like, we create a big mystery. And
yes,
that's why I'm
definitely ask. Absolutely.
It's so much easier to ask. And like, I even play like, I'll have to send this to my current marketing assistant, Alexandria. I'm always like, okay, Alexandria, what's cool with the kids? And she's like, is that your way of asking me about Gen Z stuff? I'm like, that's exactly what I'm asking you. And she just knows, like, that's my, please help me, like, understand this. Yeah. And sometimes just asking is the best way of just acknowledging, like, you don't fully understand this. And it shows that you're willing to learn and understand, and say, just because I'm your supervisor, your boss, and a human older than you does not mean that I know everything, and that I'm willing to learn, and I'm vulnerable, and I'm open to learning. And that is something that leaders are willing to do. And that's something that Gen Z doesn't take themselves too seriously. So why should we? Like, make fun of yourself a little bit. Like, they roast themselves on TikTok. Like, they make fun of themselves. Like, they point out their flaws. They point out, like, the things that are ironic about this generation. Like, don't be making fun of them, but they don't take themselves too seriously. And so, like, we could walk around and say, like, we don't understand them. We don't understand them. We'll never understand them, and be so serious about it, which is a serious topic. But at the same time, we can address it with humility, and we can also just ask with curiosity and care. And so I'm like, if you don't know, ask kindly. That would be my suggestion.
So Megan, that goes exactly to a point of what is the best way to ask the question that's going to help them understand that you're trying to understand them and enable them to give you useful information back.
Yeah, I think that there's always, we have to, as I said, like, ask with curiosity and care is this mindset that we're recognizing there's a human across the room from us, or across the table from us, or across the conversation, the Zoom room, whatever it is, that there's a human there. And there's always like a vulnerability when we're in that conversation. So I think it's recognizing that there's always going to be risk in having like a conversation. So one, recognizing that. Two, with that idea of with people being humans, making sure that people feel safe in that conversation. So I think that it comes from being genuinely curious while being conscious of emotional safety is a piece of it. So that people realize, like, when you ask something like, can you help me better understand something, is giving them that context that, like, them helping you better understand something is not help me understand so then I can fire you. Right? Because that's not the point, right? Like, it's like, I just want to know what's going on. Can you help me better understand this? I think over the weekend and like recently we've been rewatching Ted Lasso, and I think he does a great job, if you watch it, of like the way that he says Yeah, just the best, I think, like humble lessons in leadership is like the way that he frames, like, be curious but not judgmental. And I think that this idea of going into things of like seeking to truly understand but not trying to judge people is a great way of like trying to understand generations, and like trying to understand Gen Z or trying to understand older generations or trying to understand different generations. And like I think Ted's like catchphrase is, "Oh, that's fascinating. I would love to unpack that later." Like that is perfect. Like that is exactly it. Like, perfect. "Oh, that's fascinating," is like exactly how I would try to like summarize it. Like you can say like, "I can see that that's different. That is fascinating. I don't fully understand it and I want to know more." There's nothing rude, there's nothing judgmental, there's nothing wrong about that. And being able to, but you have to build that relationship. Like you can't just be like, "Hey, you young person, tell me everything you know," right? Like I wouldn't be able to ask those questions of Alexandria if I didn't have that existing relationship with her to say, "Hey, you young person, tell me everything you know about what's going on social media, or what is this trend that I'm seeing that I don't fully understand." I've developed a relationship over a year and a half, almost 2 years with her, to be able to say like, "Fill me in, because I am seeing the world from a different lens than you are, purely based on when we were born. We're of different generations. We see the world differently because of our life stages. We have a lot in common though. So like, let's get on the same page about this."
And there's also the language, not necessarily shared language, but language that she knows that you understand, and there's language that you know that she understands, so that whatever you're communicating together, there are going to be fewer misinterpretations and misunderstandings.
Absolutely. Well, yeah, and like we could go into a whole episode of just about like shared language or language in general, of like there's language that like language is culture, whether we're talking about people of a country, of a region, but even of a culture within a company, within an organization, and within a generation. There's so many really funny things that emerge online of like me trying to explain the cool terms to my older bosses, like, and explaining like the Gen Z terms to my older bosses that just have me like busting up. Like, because it's so true, there are these like friction points where we realize sometimes we are all living in the same world, but we are all living in very different worlds at the same time, because we exist in very different spaces and different mindsets. And we have to just seek to understand each other with like an open heart and an open mind. And we're going to be working a lot more harmoniously together if we do that, and not just like jumping to judge people and thinking we know everything. So I think as much as I can plug a Ted Lasso opportunity, I try, like if we would all be in a better place if we tried to be more like Ted.
It's the best way to end this interview. I'm so happy that you quoted Ted Lasso. And if that's something that helps us bridge all generations, then I'm thrilled about it. The only thing I'm not thrilled about is we still don't know the date of season 3. So that's the only thing I'm remain concerned about.
I know.
Meghan, thank you so much for everything you shared, all the insights, a lot of really fascinating and very, very useful information to help us understand Gen Z and all the differences between the generations and the similarities. So very much appreciate all that you've shared today.
Well, thank you for the time to be here. And as always, it's just a delight to spend time with you.
Thanks again so much to Dr. Meghan Grace, generational researcher and organizational development consultant at Plaid, LLC, who designs, implements, and leads research on generations through the Institute of Generational Research and Education, with a present focus on Gen Z. The second podcast about Gen Z will be published in early January, in which I interview a member of Generation Z, Stephen Miller, about his ambitions, attitude to work, productivity, and much more. It's fascinating listening to him after hearing Meghan talk about her research. You can find out more about Meghan on LinkedIn, on Twitter and Instagram at Meghan M. Grace, MEGHANMGRACE. Her website is meghangrace.com, MEGHANMGRACE. And you can also visit instituteforgens.org, Institute, 4, GENS.org. For her recent research, please visit Global Gen Z Study. There's a link in the show notes, as they are in the process of analyzing and writing about the study. Meghan also has a podcast, #GenZ, which you can find out more about on her website. To understand more about work culture and working environments that support Gen Z in our evolving marketplace and work environments, please check out my new book, Empathy Works, the Key to Competitive Advantage in the New Era of Work. If you have enjoyed this discussion, don't forget to come back for the second Gen Z-focused interview in January after I wrap up 2022 in the next episode. If you enjoy this podcast, do tell a friend and write a quick review wherever you listen. For weekly video updates, follow me on LinkedIn and Twitter at @SophieWade. For curated, useful articles, research, and information to help navigate this period of transformation, sign up for my Work in Progress newsletter on LinkedIn and my blog, which is available on sophiewade.com and flexelnetwork.com. Until next time.